So now we conclude the topic of reconstruction with an analysis of the various causal factors behind the reason for its collapse. Why did it fall apart? Well, here is a good list, a definitive list of why it did indeed fall apart. And the first one listed on there is the decline of the radical Republicans. Now, you might remember that the radicals were actually in charge of the agenda of Reconstruction, and that's largely to meet the incompetence and the intransigence, to use our term, of Andrew Johnson himself. So the radicals controlled the path of Reconstruction, and of course, we know that this path was guided by the logic of black justice, quote unquote, right? To use our term. And again, this relates all the way back to how they interpreted the meaning of the war. And it was all about black justice, according to the radicals. Now, they were in positions of power, and they're well known, famous politicians, like I mentioned earlier, Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner and Benjamin Wade. But these guys eventually they declined in power. Some of them were not reelected, and some of them died of old age while in office. But a big reason why they declined in power, another reason was, and let me skip down to the issue of Grant administration. Okay, Grant, Ulysses Grant was an actual Union general who was critical in ending the war with his military efforts. And due to his popularity, he runs for office and wins the election as president. So he succeeds Johnson there. Now, the Grant administration at first were definitely considered radical in their agenda, okay, just like the radical Republicans. However, as the Grant administration evolved, they became more corrupt and basically incapable or inept in their handling of Reconstruction. They became more connected to big business. And again, this idea of corruption. They were well known as a corrupt administration who couldn't get anything done. And in fact, the Grant administration divided the Republican Party rather than unifying, right? And let's recall when the radicals were in charge, the party was unified in the effort to thwart Johnson. Okay, so those two factors, the decline of radical Republicans, coupled with the Grant administration being mired in corruption and inadequacy, incapable of doing their job, well, basically, you see Reconstruction losing steam, okay? And now you could connect it to other things like, as stated there, the national shift in attention from the war. As you can imagine, by the 1870s, when Grant was in power, the nation was very weary with all these issues related to the Civil War itself, and that included Black freedom and Southern Reconstruction. So the national mood shifted, if you will. You see this sort of compassion fatigue, to use a term, when it came to the plight of ex slaves in the South. And you see the shift being now redirected from the South to like the West, right, with westward expansion, or back to the North with the resumption of our Industrial Revolution. All right, so these two things, westward expansion and the Industrial Revolution, were now first and foremost in the minds of Americans. They're more preoccupied with those things than trying to um, reconstruct really the South, right? Especially reconstruct its racial relations. Okay, so another thing that we acknowledged earlier was Southern intransigence itself. So we talked about the redemption movement and the paramilitary organizations, the terrorist groups like the Klan. And what this did was effectively prevent Northern efforts from realizing their goals and their agenda in the South. Basically, what you could say is Southern intransigence won, right? And that was their goal in the first place. The redemption movement, especially, they wanted to thwart the efforts of the North, and they succeeded in that goal, right? Okay, so you see all these things I just mentioned, but probably the most critical event that really underscored the end of military excuse me of Reconstruction was the end of military Reconstruction itself, and it was connected to the presidential election of 1876. So what happened here? It was this: you had the election, and at the end, you see the Republican nominee, Benjamin. Oh, excuse me. You see the Republican nominee. His name was Rutherford B. Hayes, and he was running against the Democratic Party nominee. His name was Tilden, Samuel Tilden. And in the end, you see Tilden gaining the majority of votes. All right. He had the majority of votes, similar to our last election, by the way, of 2016. So now the Republican Party realized that their domination and their reign over politics was now threatened. But what they did is, if you will, make a backdoor deal. They met with the Democratic Party and they tried to negotiate a deal whereby their nominee, Rutherford B. Hayes, would be installed as the president, right? Rather than Tilden, who was the winner of the majority of votes. Well, what the South, or the Democratic Party, to be more precise, demanded was, okay, let's make a deal. You end military Reconstruction. You withdraw Northern troops from the South, and you could have Hayes as the President of the United States. And that's indeed what happened. So by 1876, 1877, you see the withdrawal of Union troops from the South. You see the end of military Reconstruction. You see the end of, quote, bayonet rule, to use the Southern term. And from here, you can see what's going to happen. All right, there'll be a few years, maybe a decade, of the South trying to figure things out. But as you know, Jim Crow, which we'll discuss in a future lecture, is going to creep in the South. And what is Jim Crow? Just to foreshadow a future lecture. Well, in case you don't know what it is, it's legalize racial segregation in the South. Okay, so these factors, this is a constellation of factors that effectively led to the collapse of Reconstruction. Now, Du Bois. Let's remember W.E.B. Du Bois. It's hard for me to say. Du Bois mentioned that Reconstruction was indeed a failure, but he called it, quote, a splendid failure. What does he mean by that? He means that, yes, it did fall apart, but you know what? For just a brief period, you see African American agency really pressing their claims towards freedom and black justice. And you see the expansion of African American freedoms to its outer limits, right? Only to contract due to the forces of Southern intransigence, really. Okay, so it was a splendid failure, according to Du Bois. Now, I just mentioned Jim Crow, or legal racial segregation. What's going to happen in the 20th century is the civil rights movement with the conclusion of World War II. So from 1947, let's say, through 1970, you have the civil rights movement. And that's also called Second Reconstruction, Reconstruction Part 2, right? And the attempt there is to finish the project of Reconstruction, to eliminate Southern white supremacy and black imposed subordination, and to finally try to make things more equal in a political, social, and economic sense in the South.